Welcome back, everybody, to the channel. We are back today with another Steelers NFL draft preview, and I am joined by my good buddy Nick Martin. Nick is my co-host for the Steelers Draft Talk Pod over on allsteelers.com. One of the best draft minds in the business, bar none. Been putting in serious work throughout this entire cycle, and I'm really excited to have him on the channel. Today, we're going to go do a little bit of a this or that type segment. We're going to weigh questions about prospects from the same positional group, but at different values of the NFL draft to see which one we'd rather select. So, be some good conversation going back and forth. Excited to get into these possibilities. But first off, Nick, how we doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. I appreciate being on the show. I always appreciate the support you give me. And I love the stuff you're doing on your YouTube channel. Like you've really been growing everything. I I love just seeing like that growth, like just year to year, like with especially with your content. And I'm really excited to talk about this because this is like my favorite exercise to do. I always love prioritizing value more than anything because if I can get a guy later that I like versus a guy, earlier that might have a little more questions on, but I kind of but I get his game, like, I understand the value there. It's just a very fun exercise.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. I got about 6 or 7 different questions that we're gonna go over, talk about a dozen or so prospects as it relates to the Steelers. Now that we're heading up, into draft weekend, I'm really excited about seeing how this plays out. A lot of these guys that we're gonna discuss have been linked to the Steelers in some capacity. Pretty much all of them have either had a formal combine visit with the team, a top 30. They've shown interest at them or with them at the Senior Bowl or anything like that. So these are going to be guys that you've seen linked in a lot of mock drafts. So we're going to go through the possibilities of what makes sense, what doesn't. So without further ado, let's get into the first question. So I wanted to ask you what your favorite scenario is. Let's talk about trading up for Paris Johnson Jr. And just for the sake of the exercise, we'll say trading up to about like in the 9 to 10 range. Would you rather trade up for Paris Johnson Jr. or take Darnell Wright, tackle from Tennessee at 17?
If I'm guaranteed to get right at 17, I'm good with that. I don't Paris Johnson's the top rated tackle on my board, not counting Peter Skoronsky. And also, I just believe if you're moving up to 9, you're going to have to give up 32. And I've seen there was a really good press conference today talking about the trade calls they've gotten on the number 32 overall pick, and I think they could actually get value from trading down out of that pick more than anything. So I would prefer, if I'm going to get a tackle, I there's not like a huge difference between like Darnell Wright and a Paris Johnson for me. There might be a little bit of concern off the field with Darnell Wright from some. It's weird. Like there's really good reports from Bob McGinn, who does his work, and he interviews these scouts. Some of them are a bit old and curmudgeon, so you don't quite you get some really dated responses, but something to watch for in that regard around Darnell Wright. But I haven't seen very many concerns with him overall. I think he carries 330 pounds extremely well. I think he's working hard this draft process. I think the Steelers like him. I think there's very much good interest there. And I just think maximizing the value of the deeper parts of the draft in terms of cornerback and like offensive guard and stuff like that, keeping that 32 pick is so important to being able to maximize that, whether it be trading out of that pick or staying there.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, for those of you that have followed me, y'all have probably heard me and Nick's podcast, the Draft Pod. If you haven't, please go check those out. But we talked at length about this tackle class recently, and Paris Johnson Jr. to me is the prototypical left tackle for what you look for at the next level. You just look at the size, the athleticism, especially in his own blocking scheme. Like I absolutely would love to get my hands on Paris Johnson. But like you said, it's going to require a trade up. And to me, and this may be controversial to some, but the only player in this class that I would really strongly consider trading up for would be Jalen Carter, because
Yeah.
I think that Carter is the most talented player in the draft. There's some off the field stuff that you're going to have to do your homework on, but and I think that Paris Johnson Jr. can be a top 10 tackle in the NFL one day. But like you said, having to give up 32 or at the very least give up 49 and then some change, maybe a pick next year, a day two pick next year, something like that. I just think that that's a rich asking price. Johnson, has the ability to pay that off, and I understand the thought process behind getting a blindside protector for Kenny Pickett. 100% on board. It's just if I could stay at 17 and get a guy like Darnell Wright, that's probably the route that I would go in order to keep the rest of my draft capital, because I also think that Darnell Wright has the potential to be a really good, solid right tackle starter in the league. The things that I love about Wright, just his hand usage. I loved how advanced some of his moves are. He spams that snatch trap move that gets defenders on the turf. He's a physical guy. He really fits what I think the Steelers envision their offensive line looking like next year. If you look at just taking the fight to the other team, that aggressive nature, I think that they want to get back to that. And right style of play certainly fits that mold. I think he checked boxes in terms of like his athletic testing, which was nice to see. I personally have a late first round grade on Darnell Wright, taking him at 17. Value there. I mean, I don't really know where that would fit in for the team. Ideally, maybe you trade back a couple spots and still get him, but I mean, you could say that about every single prospect. I don't really have too many overly concerning thoughts on them taking him at 17. I think he's going to be a good player at the next level, and that's why I would personally like to stand pat at 17, because you're still getting I think good positional value. I know people will also weigh the fact that Wright's probably going to be a right tackle and Johnson's going to be a left tackle. Um, and I think that some of those thoughts are a little bit outdated, in my opinion, because the best pass rushers in the NFL right now, like, they rush from both sides. I mean, you look at a guy like TJ Watt, who rushes 90% of the time over the right tackle. So how you're prioritizing those two positions, I think it's a little more. I guess what I'm trying to say is the positional value between left tackle and right tackle isn't nearly as vast as it used to be, because other NFL defenses aren't always putting their best pass rusher over the left tackle anymore. They're trying to, space those guys out.
For me, I mean, honestly, I kind of have started to value them similarly in terms of right tackle and left tackle. For me, it just matters if I have like a stud right tackle or a left tackle, and then I have like a serviceable level starter like an Andrew Wiley or something like that
Hmm.
in that regard. And I think you can argue that Dan Moore or Chukwuma Okorafor could be like in that tier of they're serviceable enough. But you don't want them to be like their top tackles, and that's why Pittsburgh is trying to address this in the
Hmm.
draft, especially their depth. They have nothing behind them.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree there. In this, I'll also point out just one more thing about the tackles. I don't think that this tackle class is overly deep. And, there's not very many guys in this class that I really feel like are going to come in as rookies and beat out a guy like Dan Moore. So if you're wanting to upgrade that position, you have to prioritize it early in the draft, or else like you're going to be stuck with, maybe getting a developmental prospect in the middle rounds or something like that. I still anticipate the Steelers are going to take a tackle with one of their first three picks, to come in and at least compete or provide, a swing tackle like depth as a rookie for sure. Next question. Would you rather take Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State at pick 17, or take Tyreke Stevenson out of Miami at 49?
A lot of these questions, you have to think about like who's available at the time. So if you're considering Joey Porter Jr., I would have to believe that there was a huge tackle run at the time. The Commanders are a huge threat to be able to take a tackle right before the Steelers pick, and depending on that, they might get like the best corners falling in their lap, like a Porter Jr. Deontay Banks is going to be in that range as well. For me, I would probably go with Porter Jr., and a lot of that has to go with I just believe he is a more fluid player overall. I think Tyree Stevenson is technically sound in his press technique, but I think if you play him from an off coverage, especially and from a pedal, he is going to be shitting himself back there in terms of being able to mirroring and reacting. You could play him from a shuffle in zone leverage. I think he's got really good eyes in that regard in terms of being able to read. And he played in the slot a lot at Georgia before he transferred to Miami. So there is a good player there, but I do think the upside of Joey Porter Jr. is more enticing than the floor of a Tyreke Stevenson. Plus, the Steelers have known Porter for years. They know what they're getting. You don't quite know all the details with Tyreke Stevenson. I know that Ike Taylor's worked him out extensively, and he really likes him. So we'll see what happens there. I wouldn't be shocked, honestly, if they ended up in a situation where they ended up taking both Porter Jr. and like a Tyree Stevenson later on, like because I genuinely believe they need to double down a corner in this draft. This is too deep of a class to be able to just take one corner, and they have a need at all corner spots. Like they need a slot cover guy. They need an outside guy because Levi Wallace is on an expiring deal and he's more of a zone coverage type player. Patrick Peterson, he's a short term solution. He's a band aid like for this problem, and he's going to be a mentor for whoever they draft. They need to ensure the future by prioritizing corner in this year's class, whether it be doubling down or maybe even tripling down.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. In terms of this question specifically, man, I think that I would probably lean Joey Porter Jr. at 17 as well. Just because, like you said, the upside with Porter is very noticeable. You just look at a guy like that with his type of size, that build, that enormous wingspan. He can basically just engulf receivers and just send them to the shadow realm along the sidelines. And I love the size, and I do think that he is routinely in the hip pocket of receivers to the point where he can make plays at the catch point, even if the ball production isn't necessarily there on film.
The
Um,
recovery length is insane because he
yes,
like when he's beat across his face, he somehow gets his hand in there like when he has no business being able to do it just because he has like a 99th percentile wingspan.
yeah, for sure. And like something I've noted on Twitter is that really his footwork is what needs to be kind of reworked from the ground up, in my opinion. I know that sounds like really drastic, especially for a guy that I have a first round grade on, but this just shows you how good I think he could potentially be with the right set of coaching. I just think, he really needs to refine his footwork. Like too often, you'll see him taking false steps in press coverage. You'll see him lock his hips out. You'll see him take swings and misses with his length. But he has enough recovery ability. I actually think he's a little more fluid in the hips than maybe some people are currently giving him credit for. I definitely don't think he's stiff. I think he's high hipped and not necessarily going to flip his hips like some of these like 6 foot corners, but I don't think he's stiff, especially for a bigger guy.
He's a little
Um,
more slow-footed like in
yeah,
terms of playing off coverage, and that's like where people get confused on his off coverage ability to be able to mirror and react. And I think you can't quite you have to understand that like he is a very great athlete in terms of being able to mirror and react, but he just has to speed up the foot quickness overall.
yeah. Yeah, totally agree. And then in terms of Tyreke Stevenson, we view him pretty similarly. I don't know that he has necessarily the highest upside, or especially as compared to a guy like Porter Jr. But one thing that I really like about Stevenson's game, and this is something that I remember us talking about, during Senior Bowl week, is his footwork at the line of scrimmage is polar opposite to Porter. It's like very patient, very pristine. He's always taking the right steps. His kick steps very fluid. It's just the transitions with him. He does a good job staying square as long as possible. He's a physical guy that can use his length to disrupt the timing of receivers, but the transitions for him are a little bit clunky. He has enough recovery speed, but I view him as like a really like linear type athlete. There are things to like about his film, and I think back to that Ike Taylor clip that you're mentioning. When his co-host asked him about taking Stevenson in the middle rounds, third or fourth round, he was like third or fourth. So it does make me think that the
Yeah.
Steelers could potentially pull the trigger on him. I don't think it's going to be at 17. I think that would
I
be
hope not.
very, very surprising to me. But 32, 49, if they haven't taken a corner at that spot, I think Stevenson's name will get thrown into the mix. But me personally, I'm going to take Joey Porter Jr. in this scenario as well. One thing that I wanted to add, not to get too off topic with the overall theme of the video, but me and you are both on the same page that we think that the Steelers should double down at cornerback. Um, but how important is it that one of those like one of the two guys that they draft can play the slot? Because like we just talked about this scenario with Joey Porter Jr. at 17, then a guy like Tyreke Stevenson at 49. Would you be willing to do the double down scenario with two boundary specific guys? I know that Stevenson played a little bit in the slot at Georgia, but I view him as a boundary corner. If you're going to double down, are you saying, "Hey, I've got to have one of these two guys as a slot capable type of prospect"?
I would say the slot capability is definitely high on their list, but in terms of how I kind of view it, I just view that they need two outside corner. They need help at both outside cornerback positions, and they need help in the slot, regardless of how you feel, like how we feel in terms of like, are they going to draft a slot capable guy? Are they going to draft two outside capable guys? Like, I just think they need to come away with two corners because this class is way too deep to only draft one. Like a guy like Riley Moss might be a good cornerback to have in this class because he's very instinctual. He has playmaking skills, really good from zone coverage, but he has good off man quickness, terms of being able to mirror and react. Like those types of corners, like in the fourth round, they would make so much sense in terms of value, and he's slot capable as well. Like there's just a lot of ways they can go with this, especially they decide, okay, let's draft Joey Porter Jr., get all this length, and then let's draft Julius Brents or Corey Trice later in the draft and just like just play a bunch of press man on the outside. Like they could definitely do that. Like there's options in this class, and that's why I like it so much.
Yep.
There's so much room to work with in terms of scheme versatility.
Yep, for sure. Definitely agree. Especially like with the Steelers, like moving more towards, that press man, like a lot more man coverage than we previously saw, years ago under like Dick LeBeau, even the early days of Keith Butler, like them being more willing to get up and press, play man coverage. But you got to have the guys, you got to have the dudes on the outside that can hold up in those type of situations. And I think there's some guys in this class that can certainly help them out with that as early as, next season. One of the scenarios that I was thinking of while you were talking, and I know this is like one of your guys that you really like, is maybe taking a guy like Porter or Banks at 17 and then doubling down and say like pick 80 or something like that and getting Clark Phillips a third, a guy who
Oh,
has played outside in college, big time playmaking skills. We know the Steelers value those ball skills, that playmaking capability. But Phillips is a guy, probably his size and athletic testing is going to push him inside to the slot. But having that inside outside versatility with Phillips, especially at that point in the draft, I think that makes a ton of sense. We're going to talk about some more slot capable guys because I have another question as it relates to that that we'll get into. But overall, I completely agree. Double dipping at the cornerback spot is a good idea, even though the Steelers, don't have double digit picks or anything like that. But that's another reason that I think I would be hesitant about trading up for a tackle, is because I really,
yes.
really want to come away with two cornerbacks in this class. Next one I want to get to, let's say Mozzie Smith, defensive tackle from Michigan at 32, or Keanu Benton, defensive lineman from Wisconsin at 49. Where would you lean there?
This one is so tough because Mozzie Smith, for me, projects more as a nose tackle. I do think there's pass rush upside to be unlocked with him. We've talked about him quite a bit on the other on the other podcasts, which everyone should go check out. Keanu Benton, I view as more of like that hybrid front where you play him like all over the line in terms of 5 technique, 3 technique, maybe even some over the nose at times, but you wouldn't play him like strictly as a nose tackle. And I think for me, if I was looking at it and I think I can get Keanu Benton at 49, like I'm guaranteed to do that, I would prefer to keep that 32 pick as a potential like trade down opportunity or just keep it in that, and take like a center there, as opposed to taking Mozzie Smith when I can get Keanu Benton at 49, which I think is terrific value. I think Benton is a really safe player in this class. He fits Pittsburgh like an absolute glove in terms of what they ask with their defensive linemen to do. And I just think the wrestling background in terms of his hand usage is so damn good. And I've seen somebody try to compare him to Cam Hayward. I don't agree, because I think Cam Hayward is a power rusher. I think Benton is a guy who likes to win with his hands first. If you ask Benton to win more with power, though, maybe that happen. Maybe that comparison happens. But I view him similarly to how I view B.J. Hill of the Bengals. Just really solid starting player, give you pass rush upside, and be solid as a run defender. I think he holds up well at the point of attack. I think there's a good amount of versatility. I would go with Benton at 49.
Yeah, this one's interesting because when I posed this question to you before we jumped on, like I honestly like am still going back and forth about where I'd go with this, because I think that the two players are both really good fits for the Steelers. They've shown interest in both. I think that they at those specific spots in the draft, both these guys make a lot of sense. Let's start with Mozzie Smith. A true zero tech nose tackle would give the Steelers like an absolute monster run defender. You talk about some of the most powerful hands, just shock value in his hands. That's Mozzie Smith. Like along with him being incredibly explosive as well. Like he is an awesome nose tackle, and we talked about this on the pod. I think that there is untapped potential in terms of his pass rushing upside, because he does have some wins on tape that don't necessarily translate into, sacks, which, the pressure rate for him is higher. And I think he's going to have a little bit more sack luck. We'll just call it at the next level. And then you get to a guy like Benton. To me, Benton is the prototypical 3-tech for what the Steelers want in their 3-4 defense. And I would absolutely love to get my hands on him, especially at 49. I don't view Benton as a extremely high ceiling prospect. That's why I think, the Cam Hayward thing would definitely be, rich to me as well. But when you talk about like his hand usage as well, awesome hand usage. I thought at the Senior Bowl, he showed a little bit more pass rushing upside than what we had seen on film as well. He's played some zero tech. He played some nose at Wisconsin as well. So could he play nose? Yes. I think Mozzie is probably the better fit if you want a nose tackle. I think Benton's the better fit if you want a 3-tech. Nose tackle for next season, you could probably argue that that's maybe a bigger need, because I don't know who the starting nose tackle is right now. I mean, maybe it's Fehoko. They did bring in Armon Watts, but I think he's more of a 3-tech as well. With bringing back Larry Ogunjobi on a long-term deal and Cam Hayward still playing at a high level, I think you do need to be cognizant of adding depth and a developmental piece such as Benton. But I also think this would be a tough conversation about like, all right, where do we want to prioritize? So that's what it is for me. I don't know that I can answer the question about who I'd want one or the other without talking about position. More than anything else. Like if I need a nose tackle, I want Smith at 32 if the Steelers deem that as a higher priority. If I need a 3-tech, I want Benton. That's kind of where I sit. So it's hedging a little bit on my own question, but I'm allowed to do that because this is my channel. So I can do whatever I want. So, but yeah, I think that's a fun conversation. I definitely think that those two guys are going to be definitely in the conversation for the Steelers on day 2. But it sounds like Mozzie may actually end up. I've seen some Cowboys rumors with him at like 26 or wherever they pick in the first round. I could see that.
Buffalo would be a really good fit for him. They got destroyed in the run game.
That is true. Yeah, it was honestly kind of sad how Buffalo was getting punked out in the run game, and I think, damn, I didn't even think about that as a possibility. That's a good idea. Next one. So I said we were going to talk a little bit about more slot options, but let's talk some slot/safety options here. Would you rather take Brian Branch from Alabama if he slipped to 32, or would you rather take Jartavius Martin from Illinois at pick 80?
This one is such a devious question because I value Jartavius Quan Martin quite a bit, but I love Brian Branch's game. With Jartavis Martin, I actually thought he was a little bit better in terms of like where he stood out better. I thought he just stood out more from the deep third as a free safety overall. So I like him more in that regard. Branch, I like him more in the slot. I think he's a very, I think he's a very disruptive player down in the box. I think he's very instinctual, working in zone, can cover in man coverage. It's a really tough question because I think Jartavis Martin has similar versatility overall. It's just he might not be as refined in that regard. So it's definitely conflicting. It really depends how the board falls overall because like safety is not very strong in this year's class. And Jartavis Martin at 80 would be tremendous value, but Brian Branch at 32 is also great value. So it's really hard to like fully say where you'd go. I think I would lean with Branch just because I think Brian Branch with Minka Fitzpatrick would give us one of the smartest safety duos in the entire league. And I think Branch's versatility as a slot corner is better than Jartavis Martin's currently. So give me the instant starter with Brian Branch at 32.
Yeah, this is a tough question as well. When I look at Brian Branch, man, like I love the film. I don't care what the testing is. Like, there's only so many athletic outliers that you can bet on each cycle. Give me Brian Branch as one of them. I don't care. I think that this dude is a stud. I watched him, 4 or 5. I think I probably watched him live like 5 or 6 times. Now I studied about 5 games of tape on him. I think he's fantastic. The best way that I can try to sell Steelers fans on Brian Branch is he's Mike Hilton against the run, but with better coverage ability. And when I look at
Yes.
like pick 32, if the NFL is stupid enough to let him fall because of his athletic testing, that's a slam dunk of a pick because of how aggressive he is playing downhill. This dude will take on blocks. He's physical at the point of attack. Excellent tackler. He's the best tackler in this entire class. I think he only missed like 1 or 2 tackles all season last year.
And he's so
Um,
aggressive in his ankles too in that regard.
yes.
And it's like it's insane like how sure of a tackler he is given all of that. Also, I want to add this real quick. A lot of people are going to look at his 40 time and they're going to think he's more of an outlier. I think he's more in terms of like a normal type of safety in terms of athletic testing cuz a lot of safeties they tend to be more explosive in their jumps
Mhm.
and they tend to have better 10 splits overall. And Brian Branch had a much better 10 split comparable to guys like Justin Simmons, who had similar type 40 times that you see, even like Kyle Hamilton. Like Kyle Hamilton got absolutely destroyed at the end of the process last year because of his slow 40 time, which was more in the 4.5s. But some scouts were like, hey, he runs 4.7 at his pro day. But you know, you just have to go with the film in this regard. And I just think Branch just offers so much there. And I just think if we nitpick the athleticism too much, like yeah, he might get beat by elite speed receivers. I saw Xavier Worthy kind of give him some issues, but how many 4.2 like speed receivers are playing in the slot? Like let's be real with ourselves on that one.
Yeah, and with Branch too, like you mentioned, angles. Like angles are incredibly important. Like the fastest way to A to B is a straight line, right? Like Branch takes the most efficient angles possible. I feel like, especially when he's working downhill, and I think he's good in coverage too. Like I saw him match up with a myriad of different body types in the slot, and he held his own. Like I think he's physical. He's got good change of direction. He's twitchy. I also think he could play safety in a pinch if you want to play him as that box safety on base downs and then roll him to the slot in sub package football. I think he could do that. Just as it pertains to Jartavius Martin, man, like when I was watching Devin Witherspoon, and I watched probably 6, 7 games of Witherspoon because I loved his tape, so technically sound, and he just plays the game with reckless abandon, and I appreciate that. The number one thing that I kept saying, like, was, dude, for one, Illinois was loaded last year. I mean, that Illinois
Yes.
defense has like 6 or 7 different pros on it, some of which are going back to school. But Martin, I kept saying, like, dude, who is this 21 cat? Who is this 21 cat? Like, he was so impressive on film. And the number one thing with him is the burst, like the short area quickness. he is explosive. And I think that really showed up in his testing too. Like you look at the 133 broad jump, 95th percentile, 44-inch vertical, 98th percentile. Like this dude is a different cat in terms of like explosiveness. So he's a little bit on the other end of the spectrum. Whereas I feel like, I'm surprised that he's not getting more buzz because of how good his testing was. But
His
Martin,
closing speed is
unbelievable.
ridiculous.
Unbelievable. I mean, the dude covers ground like in the blink of an eye. But I do think he's an incredibly versatile player. This one's tough for me because I just think Branch at 32 offers way too much value to pass up on, especially in terms of immediate impact. Um, I'll say this: like there were times in coverage where I felt like Martin was kind of bailed out a little bit because of some inaccurate throws. But I will say that he's competitive, like a lot of competitive reps on film. He can be a little bit over aggressive, but if the Steelers say like they do the scenario which you're talking about, like their first three picks, let's just say they go, tackle, corner, lineman, defensive lineman, something like that. If they have to wait on a little bit for that second, cornerback slot guy or some safety depth, 100% sign me up for Quan Martin at pick 80. So I lean Branch here, but I also will hedge that saying that Martin is incredible value at pick 80. And I think on the consensus board, it seems like he's kind of hovering around that range. So definitely a good player, man. Good player for sure. Let's go to the next one here. We got a couple more that we're going to get to. John Michael Schmitz in the second. We'll call this one at 32, just because I feel like he has gotten a little bit of that late first round buzz. So I want to mention this one. Or would you rather take Ricky Stromberg from Arkansas in the fourth?
So I think John Michael Schmitz is one of the safer players in this class. I think Ricky Stromberg is actually one of the most boom bust players in this class, but he's being picked in the range you want to pick a guy like that. I think he has issues with lunging and dropping his head way too much, especially the senior or the Shrine game. It was very concerning overall, but he has some unbelievable functional mobility in space. He's an outstanding reach blocker. Like he covers so much ground. He can pull out in space. He's nasty. You just got to refine some of the technical aspects. For Pittsburgh specifically, I kind of like Ricky Stromberg at 120 versus John Michael Schmitz at 32 because Pittsburgh has Mason Cole right now, who is a serviceable level starter, and Stromberg has the upside to grow in his role. And I think Pat Meyer, I think some of the work he's done with Dan Moore and even some of the other guys, like they improved so much this past year. And while people will look at sack numbers given up, I think Pat Meyer did a really good job of being able to maximize protection with these guys. And I think he could develop a guy like a Ricky Stromberg, and I think that type of upside would be higher than a John Michael Schmitz, even though I do think John Michael Schmitz is a very safe player in this class. I'm going to go with the riskier option, though. I'm going to go with Ricky Stromberg at 120 over John Michael Schmitz, just because I think they have some leeway in this regard because they got Mason Cole there, and I think they got a good coach to develop him.
Yeah, I completely agree. John Michael Schmitz was a guy that was in the top five for me when we did the interior offensive line rankings. Really like his hand placement. He's a guy who I think can play very well at the pivot and a zone blocking scheme. He's a fundamentally sound player, but I am in agreement with you on Ricky Stromberg. This is like one of my day three guys in this class. Like I am very surprised that he's not getting like more love. I just checked out the Pro Football Focus ranking. I think they had him in the 200s. The consensus board has him at post 150s the last time that I checked. And this is a guy who over 3,000 career snaps for Stromberg in the SEC. And yeah, he got his butt kicked a little bit against, the Georgia D tackles. I remember he was talking to me at the combine about how Derek Brown kicked his tail early in his career. But when I look at Stromberg, he does one thing at like a borderline elite level, and that is get out of his stance
Yes,
and
sir.
reach block, get to the second level. I think in terms of like short area athleticism, he's the exact type of guy that you want at the pivot. And, I think that he has some potential as a move guy to get out and pull. I would love to see if he could, do that a little bit more than he got the chance to in college. I think that he's a smart player. Again, extremely experienced. The Steelers with Mason Cole, it's kind of interesting because, Cole was a perfectly fine starter for the Steelers last year. He was actually better than I anticipated, but I do think if there are options to go out there and get, an upgradable piece or a developmental guy that you can maybe plug in there, in 2024, I think that they should look to do that because I don't know that Mason Cole is necessarily this foundational piece of their offensive line. He's just a good stopgap, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that. And a guy like Stromberg to me would be incredibly intriguing at 120. So that's the way that I would lean. There was one specific play I highlighted this on the channel already in a pin and pull breakdown that you can see some of Mason Cole's athleticism deficiencies, I think, pop up on tape from time to time when he's asked to pull or get to the second level. And I also recognize that he was playing hurt last year.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I do think that I would, if I could get an athletic upgrade at the center spot, which, the Steelers, if you think back years and years, like they've had some just elite level centers, especially as it pertains to movement ability. Think back to like prime Marquise Pouncey and some of the things that he could do in space. And I'm not saying Stromberg's going to be that type of guy. I'm just saying that I think the Steelers would at least be open to the idea of upgrading athletically at that position. So
Putting faith in Mason Cole, but at the same time, like preparing for the future.
hedging your bets. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's why I like it.
Yeah. Let's do a little linebacker, this or that. So let's talk about Trenton Simpson in the second round or Dorian Williams from Tulane in the third. So we'll just say for the sake of this argument, Trenton Simpson at 49 or Dorian Williams at pick 80.
I'm going to keep this one very short. I think it's Dorian Williams because I think Trenton Simpson is more of a safety. I talked about it a lot on the draft pod with our linebacker rankings, but Trenton Simpson to me, I think he gets lost in trash too much in terms of just his eyes. He has issues processing at the second level from the linebacker position. I think he flows much better from outside the tackle splits towards the box and or towards the third level as a safety. So in that regard, I don't see them that differently. But I think Dorian Williams, he was a former safety coming out of high school, played mostly as an overhang defender early in his career, similar to Trenton Simpson. But unlike Trenton Simpson, he played linebacker a lot more. He's been able to make a bigger jump in his level of play in terms of his ability to read and react and overall just be able to flow, find the ball carrier. Like he has good eyes, he has decent block deconstruction ability. There's great flashes and coverage. I mean, this one is not too much. This one is kind of easy for me. This one's Dorian Williams in the third because I just think that's a tremendous value versus a Trenton Simpson, who I just think is one of the biggest boom bust players in this class. I would rather take the risk a little bit later in the draft with a guy like Dorian Williams, who has similar athleticism traits, but I think is a little more polished with his eyes.
Yeah. We just got through recording the draft pod episode where we talked about both these guys. So that's why I wanted to kind of work it in. But in terms of Trenton Simpson, man, like they're first off, unbelievable athlete, like height, weight, speed prospect that just offers like pretty much everything from athletic profile that you'd really want for the position. Like you mentioned, played some safety, overhang, Mike, Will, lined up in the slot. The ability to carry receiver vertical is very intriguing. He plays when he got the chance to play at safety, to play kind of top down where he can just flow to the football. The closing speed really was the number one thing in terms of, what he did the best. I thought that his closing speed was near elite. In terms of Dorian Williams, you put me onto his tape. I'm going to continue to give you credit for that earlier in the cycle. But, 6'1", 228, so a little bit smaller of a guy, but the near 34-inch arms really show up. He can clog the passing lanes, really good feel as a cover, like a zone coverage defender, but he can also like match up with some tight ends. He can cover backs to the flat, rangy defender. Love the violence and physical play demeanor that he exhibits on like really a down to down basis. Like I love seeing this dude just jolt ball carriers upon contact. It's one of my favorite parts of his game. He's a violent dude. I'm gonna say Dorian Williams at pick 82. The Steelers, their approach to the inside linebacker position has been interesting to be in free agency. They pretty much told us what they felt of their room last year about, letting Devin Bush walk. They cut Miles Jack. They bring in Cole Holcomb, who I think is kind of a jack of all trades, but maybe master of none type, just solid inside linebacker, starting caliber player, but doesn't really have that elite trait to kind of really hang his hat on to where he's going to make a huge impact next season. And then you got a Landon Roberts, who they brought in as that physical, like thumper type, early down specialist guy who's just going to play downhill. When I think about what that room is missing, I think that both of these guys really offer the type of upside and coverage that could potentially fill this room out. But I like Dorian Williams fit a little bit more. Aaron Curry was at his pro day, so I think that Williams is definitely a guy that could come off the board, in the third or fourth round. Typically, when the Steelers are looking at prospects in that range, assistant coaches going to their pro day is usually a pretty good indicator. We saw it with George Pickens last year. We saw it with DeMarvin Leal last year. So that doesn't mean nothing. I definitely think
Yeah.
that Dorian Williams is high on their board, and I definitely think that he makes a lot of sense at that stage in the draft. So that's why I would lean Williams as well. We got two more. I got one more that I sent to you, and then I'm gonna throw a little curveball at you to end the episode. Darnell Washington from Georgia in the second, or Luke Schoonmaker in the fourth. We'll say Washington at 49, just for sake of the argument.
So I am really high on Luke Schoonmaker. He may be turning 25 as a rookie, which is obviously a detractor for many people. But the thing I will say to that is I've watched quite a bit of Michigan. I got to watch JJ McCarthy quite a bit. He's a really intriguing quarterback at times. There's a lot of inconsistencies with him. Something I've noticed with the college level, they don't like to use their tight ends fully into the higher option of, or sorry, the higher progression in terms of where you target them. And a lot of times Luke Schoonmaker is playing in line as a blocker. He's in pass protection doing a lot of the dirty work, and let me tell you, man, he is god damn awesome at it. He is almost like Matt Spaeth, Heath Miller-esque in that regard. And that's the thing I love about him. Like he can chip and pass protection really well. Like I seen him handle guys one-on-one quite well. Like he's one of the top rated pass protectors on Pro Football Focus in terms of tight ends, and it matches up with the film. And his run blocking, he creates a lot of space. Like he is just a really sound with his technique. He's got good low pad level. He's uses his hands really well. He's got good anchor strength. He's like, he's 6'5", like 250. Like he's a really solidly built dude, and he is an unbelievable testing athlete. I don't think enough people talk about this with Luke Schoonmaker. Like he is an unbelievable athlete. I remember you told me, because you were watching a lot of the Shrine stuff, and you're like, yeah, Luke Schoonmaker was running away from these guys in one-on-one during Shrine game practices. And I saw a lot of his ability to sink his hips in his routes. There's definitely some nuance in terms of being able to manipulate zone leverage. I think he just didn't get a lot of chance to play one-on-one versus man coverage a lot of the time. The only weakness I see in his game, and this is where Darnell Washington beats him in that regard, Darnell Washington is unbelievably difficult to tackle after the catch. Like he is, it's like if you took a moose and you put him onto the NFL field, you're just not gonna tackle that guy. You need like quite a few guys to bring him down. But Luke Schoonmaker, like his contact balance is a little bit lacking in that regard. I do think, like, in terms of functional strength, he might not be the best in terms of taking on tackles, but in terms of a blocker, it definitely, he's a lot better. He can make some guys miss. Like he's got like a 6'8" 3-cone drill, which is just utterly
Absurd for a
absurd
tight
for
end.
a tight end. Like for me, I value Luke Schoonmaker quite highly. If I get him in the 4th round, I'm doing a lap around my house at this point. Like I think this guy is a baller. I think there's a little bit more receiving upside with him. For me, Darnell Washington, I think he has a reputation because a lot of people look at his athleticism, his RAS, and they see like Rob Gronkowski comparisons, and I just think one, Gronkowski was just different in many regards. He was way more nuanced than people gave him credit for. I think the thing about Darnell Washington is he's a little bit lumbering out of his hip sinks, and he's in terms of his like route breaks overall. I think for me, I actually thought Jelani Woods, who's a comparable athlete, was actually a better route runner overall, but I thought Washington had more functional strength as a run blocker. And I just think you can there's definitely some technical aspects to work out with Darnell Washington's game. He likes to lunge a bit, but he can like take guys out. Like he destroyed 40 for LSU, who looks like he could be like a
A
top.
beast.
Yeah.
A beast.
Like when they played LSU, I was just like I was like laughing my ass off just watching Darnell Washington get all that push in the run game. So I think both these players fit Pittsburgh really well because Washington would allow the Steelers to play Pat Freiermuth more as their primary slot receiver and not have him block in line so much. Same time, Luke Schoonmaker can do that, and he might offer a little more in terms of his receiving upside. Like I think he has better hands overall. I think there's more potential with his routes. There's more flashes there. I'm going with Luke Schoonmaker in the 4th. I'm sorry that one took so long, but I wanted to talk about
No, those
both these
those are
players.
those are both really intriguing prospects. Two of the guys that I probably spent the most time on, I think, out of this tight end class. Darnell Washington, just the frame and freakish just build is incredibly. It's fun to watch. Like that's the best way that I can describe him as a
He's
player. Like
fun.
I did a YouTube video on him recently for the channel. Like he's just fun. Like if you watch him play, it's aesthetically pleasing seeing him just throw guys and maul guys as a blocker. He
I'm
was asked to do a lot of different things. Like you mentioned, Schoonmaker getting some one-on-one pass blocking reps. I mean, they did a lot of the Kyle Shanahan kind of inside zone play action stuff where he would have to come across the formation and then stunt a guy one-on-one in pass protection against like SEC level defenders. I saw them put this dude on Gervon Dexter one-on-one last year, and like he held his own. Like so some of the stuff that he can do as a blocker, really intriguing. He can insert on like wham blocks. He combos. He can wash guys down the line of scrimmage. He can create displacement. He can climb to the second level. Just the frame is really difficult for defenders to get around because
yeah.
he's massive and he has incredibly long arms. So it's difficult to just get around him. And then as a receiver, I don't think he's ever going to be like a number 2 or even number 3 option in a passing game. I really don't think that he's that type of prospect.
He's a
What I
seam
do
buster.
what I do think he can do very well though, bust the seams, get this, and like one of the things that I think is getting slept on a little bit in terms of his receiving ability, I don't think he's going to be a high volume player, but I think he's going to create some explosive plays like up the seams. And then you get this dude, on wheel routes or into the flat where you can just throw in the ball and have him break tackles. This dude, you talk about guys that are difficult to get on the ground. You dive at this dude's legs, he's running right through you. I mean, he's
Yeah.
that powerful. Like his lower body, he's thickly built, runs through contact, runs through arm tackles. I'm a fan of his. And then like Schoonmaker, I remember like we were talking about him at the Shrine Bowl. Full disclosure, I had never heard of this dude. I mean, I had watched Michigan a lot on offense, but they like to hand the ball off to Blake Corum about like 35 times a game. So I know their receivers. I didn't have a lot of exposure really to Schoonmaker. And then I watched him in one-on-ones at the Shrine, and like he was cooking these cats. And I know I try not to get too overreactive to things like that because those drills are slanted towards the offense. But you talk about a dude that can separate at the break point. Like this dude was getting open, not just using his size, but having a better ability than Washington to sink his hips, get out of his breaks with some explosiveness to create some separation. So Schoonmaker's a guy that I really like. There was a play that I noted from him. You talk about some of the different blocking assignments that he had, dude. As a perimeter blocker, getting this dude out in space, like I watched this dude wash Jack Campbell
Yeah.
against Iowa. I think it was on a screen where he pretty much just erased Campbell from the play. So he's an awesome player. I think I lean Washington here at 49 just because of maybe it's just me falling victim to the fun aspect of it. But like you said, Schoonmaker at 120, I think he's one of the more underrated players in this class. I think he's going to come off the board maybe earlier. I remember like before around the Shrine, I was looking up like stuff on him and you couldn't even find like scouting reports on it. He wasn't even on very many big boards. And then like now I feel like he's starting to get a little buzz, which is deservedly so because I think he's a good player. So
if he goes to Miami, he's going to be an awesome fit.
That would be a great fit
because they want their tight ends to be able to block. Mike McDaniel wants a little bit of his version of George Kittle. Not saying they're similar in terms of like but in terms of the blocking ability, in terms of the athleticism, there's some similarities there. If there's a really good scheme fit, I could see Schoonmaker maybe coming off the board a little sooner than people expect, just because he's so complete in a lot of aspects of his game. A lot of people talk about Michael Mayer as like a really complete tight end. Luke Schoonmaker is the dollar store version, just sitting on day 2.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think Schoonmaker, I would agree with you. A very interesting player. I don't know if it's just that New England coach, the Shrine Bowl, but like I keep seeing him in a Patriots uniform. I don't know why. It's just like with Hunter Henry, I know like this is probably going to be his last year on his deal, and they let Jonnu Smith go in early in free agency. Yeah, they did sign Gesicki. But I see some Schoonmaker taking over that Hunter Henry role in 2024, and I like the fit a lot. I got one more. I didn't actually send you the link or this question before the pod, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. But it's guys that you're familiar with. Would you rather take Lucas Van Ness at 17?
Oh God.
Or would you rather take Isaiah McGuire at 120?
Oh, those are very different players for me. I have Isaiah McGuire as an edge rusher, and I have Lucas Van Ness as an interior defensive lineman. So, where did you say McGuire was going?
120.
120. Okay. I think McGuire at 120 is just better overall value. I think McGuire is one of the most underrated edge rushers in this class in terms of being able to generate power. He has surprising bend too. Like a lot of people talk about like Myles Murphy in the first round. There's a guy very similar to him who's going to go later in the draft, and it's Isaiah McGuire, and he has better film. He beats guys like Broderick Jones. He's put up some really good stuff in the SEC. I definitely think that would be an awesome addition to the edge room in terms of just getting them that third edge, maybe that Alex Highsmith insurance. I'm crossing my fingers that they are going to re-sign him, because you know how I feel about Highsmith, but McGuire would be an awesome addition. And I'm higher on Lucas Van Ness than most people in Steelers Nation. I think most of them are very low on him because they see him as a big lumbering power rusher off the edge. And they're right to a degree. I think for me, you put him in the interior. There's Nick Farabaugh. I listened to your guys' show like the other day, and I really agreed a lot with what he had to say, because I've gone back. I've watched old film at times on older guys. So I'm always wondering, how were they as prospects? And Cam Hayward was this all hustle, just constantly. Just the motor was constantly running, and he was just winning with nothing but power. And there wasn't really like a ton of nuance to his game. So I see that vision of a Lucas Van Ness, because Cam Hayward sat 2 years. People forget this. And then he became that guy in
Mm-hmm.
2013 and kept getting better with age. Good Lord, man. I don't know how he keeps getting better at this point. It's crazy, but I could see Van Ness being like, I could see him, because I think with me, I think the functional strength is there. I just think that guy needs to get better with his gap scheme responsibility, because a lot of times he'll beat guys in front of him and he takes himself out of his gap and then leads to a huge run. Because I think he holds the point of attack pretty well. I think there's potential to stack and shed as a two gap defender. Even like I've watched him against Iowa State, and there were great plays where he just got into the tackle's chest with his long arm, controlled him, then was able to tackle the ball carrier with the other. Like, there are some impressive plays that you see from him. And in terms of power rushing, there aren't many defensive linemen with his level of athleticism that can power rush the way he does. So I'm going to take McGuire at 120, obviously, but I wanted to talk about Van Ness because on the off chance that Pittsburgh does take him at 17, I'm gonna be the one playing damage control the entire draft, because I'm gonna have to tell people, oh, it's okay, don't worry, they have a plan. I hope, unless
Yeah.
they play him at edge rusher, and then that case, I might be with you guys in that regard.
Yeah, no, I mean, my basis for the question was power rushers, like adding a power rusher to the room.
Yeah,
I do like this, and this is just, I wanted to get this question out there so I could also explain a little bit of my process. But I enjoy. I know you and I kind of see Van Ness a little bit similarly. You are a decent amount higher on him than I am. But I like getting guys like you and Nick Faraball's like opinions on prospects that maybe I'm not as high on, just so that I can try to see the other side of the argument. I'm always willing to broaden my scope to see what may, if there's something that I'm missing, and then if I'm wrong, I like to understand where I was wrong. But in terms of Van Ness, I do agree that I would particularly like him more as like a move piece, where maybe he plays on the edge on early downs and then kicks inside on pass rushing opportunities. I kind of, in a different way, I kind of see him a little bit maybe like as an Arden Key type of player. And I don't think that, like,
interesting.
Arden Key had awesome season last year for the Jaguars as like a supplemental role player. Different
Good
type
call.
of skill sets. Like, he's more slender,
Mhm.
wins with swipes and stuff like that. Whereas Van Ness is more of a power guy. But in terms of just alignment and deployment, I kind of see those guys a little bit similarly. In terms of Isaiah McGuire, man, like, all you gotta do is pop on that Georgia tape. Like, you mentioned, his matchup with Broderick Jones. Like, he was really able to get into Jones' chest a good amount of the time. Jones has this tendency to be late with his hands and invite contact to his shoulders. And McGuire, like, as soon as he saw his pad level raise, he just, shot that hand and drove him backwards. There was another rep in that game, if I remember correctly,
Ripped under his
where,
pads.
yeah, well, this one, he actually was spiking inside, like towards the guard. And
Oh,
he kind of just barreled through the guard and like drove him back at Stetson Bennett's feet, and almost got a sack by bullying the guard into the quarterback. So just in terms of power profile and like underrated bendability, he tested extremely well. McGuire is a guy that in round 3, round 4, like, if you're looking for the Steelers to potentially I don't want to say prepare for life outside of after Alex Highsmith, because I don't have any qualms about paying him or paying 2 edge rushers if that's what the Steelers elect to do. But maybe just if you're looking for a rusher to potentially make you feel better about those contract negotiations, to where you're not pigeonholing yourself into either a franchise and Highsmith next year, or feeling like you absolutely have to take a pass rusher edge defender round 1 next year. You get a guy like McGuire in the 3rd or 4th round, and he could be a potential starter for you across from TJ Watt. And then there's always that looming question of, like, who's the Steelers edge rusher 3 right now? Like, I don't know. It could be you. It could be me. It could be Quincy Roche. Like, I mean, it could, like, we really don't know at this point in time, which is a little bit scary. So I think that is that's one of the least talked about positions on like Steelers Twitter and stuff, that I think like could become a bigger deal if the Steelers don't address it this year. And McGuire would be at the top of my list just as that power rusher that can really push the pocket while you got TJ Watt that can kind of run the hoop.
You
I would be really excited about getting him.
Yeah, you mentioned his ability, like against the guard and against Georgia. A guy he actually reminds me of is Darius Smith from days at
That's a good one.
Kentucky. Like he had a lot of just ability to just generate power from as a rusher, and he moved around a lot around the formation at the NFL. A little bit of underrated bend with his game, but mostly, he's a pressure guy, not so much a sack guy. And I think that's the type of guy you'd be getting with McGuire. And he's a very functional run defender too. Like, he's in the 260, like he's in the high 260s. He holds the point of attack really well. You can move him around the formation, get creative with your defensive line fronts. Like that would definitely be a terrific fit for Pittsburgh. And McGuire's one of my guys. I really like him a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a little curveball to end the episode, but I appreciate you jumping on and doing this with me, brother. It's been a blast. It's been fun doing the
Sir.
draft pod on a weekly basis throughout the cycle. For all of you guys that stayed listening to the very end, we appreciate you all. Please do me a favor. Make sure you drop a like, drop a comment. Make sure you guys let us know what you thought of the episode. If y'all want to see like more like long form stuff like this on the channel, I'd be happy to oblige, especially if I can get good quality guests to hop on here and talk some ball with me as well. I also want to plug Nick's draft guide, which is up on the All Steelers site. I will put the link to that in the description of the video, so you guys should be very excited to check that out. One of the best draft minds out there, and I want to make sure to plug his content while we're at it. So other than that, appreciate you guys hopping on with us, and we will see you guys next time.